Becoming a contractor in the UK gives you the opportunity to run your own company, operate independently, and if you're bored of all the office politics and don't want to be embedded in a single company, I think it's a fantastic way to work. In this video, I'm going to give you the complete guide for everything you need to know to set up your own company and start operating as a contractor. And then by the end, if you decide you want to do it yourself, then you'll have everything you need to know to get started. For those that don't know me, my name's Warren. I've been a software engineer for over 15 years. And for the past 6 or 7 of those years, I've also been a full-time contractor in the UK. In this video, we'll cover why you would actually want to be a contractor in the first place, how to set up a company, bank account, all of the tax implications, some of the laws around things like IR35. You might not have heard of that, but if you're contracting, it's going to be really important, and how to actually find contracts and remain profitable in the long term. And then finally, we'll talk about day rates, because as a contractor, you're paid on a daily basis. If you do have any questions or feel like I haven't covered anything in enough detail, please just let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. I've also timestamped everything, so if you want to jump to a particular section, just go ahead and do that. So let's start with why you would actually want to be a contractor in the first place. And for me and a lot of people that I've met in the industry, once you get to a certain point, once you get to like a senior software engineer level, you've got a choice of whether you want to carry on being in the production team, writing software, building products, or you can go down the management route. Typically, contracts pay a lot more than permanent salaries if you want to stay in the production team. If you don't want to go into management, which I really didn't want to do, then contracting offers a lot of flexibility for working remotely, moving around different companies with the opportunity to work in completely different industries, getting a really decent salary at the same time, and preventing you from getting embedded in any kind of politics. So once you get to the senior software engineer level, or it doesn't have to be tech, there's contracts in many different areas of the industry. Also, if you want to run any kind of business on the side, say you're building a SaaS, you can offset all of those costs against the contractor business, rather than on the other side being paid a salary that you've already paid tax on and then using that to fund business expenses. It just doesn't seem logical to do it that way. So if you want to learn to operate your own company and learn how taxes work to eventually build any kind of company, then contracting is a really good way to go. So let's now just get into the weeds of all of the details, everything you need to know to start operating a contractor company. Before you set up a company and set up a bank account and get an accountant, you should actually find a contract first, because you don't want to waste all of that time setting up all of the legal infrastructure if you're not actually serious about getting a contract in the first place. If you've never had a contract before, or you don't know anyone that's already contracting, the best way to get a contract is to go through a recruiter. I know a lot of people don't like recruiters or don't like working with recruiters, but they are a fantastic way to get into the industry. Particularly, there's a lot of recruiters that work purely with contractors or a mix of contract and perm. So go onto LinkedIn, look for specifically contract roles in the UK. Typically, most of them are going to be in London, and start applying for those contract roles directly. Even if you don't get that specific contract or don't want that specific contract, at least connect with the recruiter and then reach out to them and build a relationship with them so you can start getting contracts through them that way. The reason they would want to work with you is, of course, they're taking a percentage cut of the contract. Typically, it's like 20%. That's never a cost for you. It's always on top of the day rate that you charge to the business. So don't worry about any kind of loss of income if you're working with a recruiter. So once you've found a contract, you'll typically have to interview for it. Usually the interview process is not quite as strict as for full-time employees, down to the fact that they can just get rid of you at a moment's notice. But you'll still probably have to do some form of tech test. So get used to doing these kind of things often, because if you're changing contracts every 6 months to a year, you're going to have to constantly be re-interviewing and keeping your skills sharp, basically, so you can pass all of these interviews. But once you've started interviewing at a company and you've got the go-ahead that you're going to get issued the contract, then you can set up the company, set up the bank account, so you can actually get the contract over, sign it, and send it back to the company. As I say, don't do any of that stuff until you've actually got a decent sign that the contract is actually going to go ahead. But once that is in place, the first thing you want to do is set up a company. You can either do this by finding an accountant first and they will just set up the company for you. A lot of them typically offer that as a service, but it's so easy, in fact, to just do it yourself. Literally just go to Google, say set up company UK, find the first link that's gov.uk, set up a private limited company. I think the cost for this is about 71 quid, something like that, and just click register now. and then you'll just go through the whole application, set up a company. It takes 5 to 10 minutes, something like that. It's really, really easy. And then once you've got the limited company set up, then you can start getting a bank account and then getting an accountant as well. In terms of banking, you'll need a business bank account. So I would recommend either Revolut Business, Monzo, Tide, all of these kind of online banks. Typically, I wouldn't recommend going to the high street banks just because the application process is ridiculously slow. And a lot of the time with something like Revolut, for example, you can get a bank account set up in 10 minutes. So at this point, you'll have the contract in principle, the company set up, and a bank account set up. At that point, you can then give the bank details and the company details to the company that you're contracting with, and then they can send you out a contract which you can sign, and then you're ready to go. You don't need an accountant immediately, although you will start to need to look for one about a month or two after setting up the company, because that's when you're going to have to start paying things like VAT, corporation tax, all of that kind of stuff. I would highly recommend against trying to do accounts on your own. It might seem simple, or you might think that it's something that could be automated, but I tried it once and it was really fucking slow and difficult. So my recommendation would be just find an accountant that specifically works with contractors. They cost around £120 a month. That will be a business expense as well, so it'll come out of your limited company. They'll tell you when VAT needs to be paid. They'll sort out your corporation tax. They can even do the self-assessment part for you as well. If all of this sounds quite complicated, I'm going to go deep into the tax stuff in just a sec. There are companies that do accounting specifically for contractors. The one I'm using at the moment is called Gorilla Accounting. They specifically work with small businesses and contractors, and I've had pretty much no issue with them so far. They charge a pretty fair rate. I think I'm paying something like £120 to £140 a month, and they cover absolutely everything for me, so it's way less work for me to do. I have also worked with independent accountants, and typically if you want a more personal service, this is a fantastic way to go. They'll be a lot more detailed on answering any kind of questions that you have, but typically they'll also be a lot more expensive because of that. When I've worked with personal accountants in the past, they'll charge a fee of like, again, £140 per month. But then at the end of the year, when they need to submit all the tax as well, you'll sometimes get given a second charge of about £1,000 for them to do all of the self-assessment for you. So the most cost-effective way to do it is to go with one of these bigger companies that specialize in working with contractors. So let's spend a little bit of time now just talking about the taxes, because this can seem really complicated on the surface. And I found through talking to people that this is the thing that puts people off going into contracting in the first place. It just seems so complicated that people just think it's not worth the hassle. But I promise you, even if it sounds complicated now on the surface, once you actually get into it and once you've been doing contracting for 1 or 2 months, you realise that it's really not that complicated at all. Let's say we've got a day rate as a contractor of £500 per day. Let's assume we're working 5 days per week, 4 weeks per month, which gives us a total income of £10,000. That £10,000 is going to get paid to your limited company, not to you. So that's not your money at the moment. It's money that stays in the limited company. You cannot just use that money to spend it on whatever you want. It has to stay in the limited company. These are separate legal entities. If you're earning over, I think it is £80,000 per year, you have to be VAT registered. So make sure you register for VAT, which means every single time you invoice a client in the UK, you have to charge VAT on top. So if you've charged them £10,000 for the day rate, you also have to charge an extra 20%, which means the invoice will come to £12,000. VAT though can basically feel pointless to you. You charge the client, you get that money into your limited company, and then you just pay it out back to HMRC at the end of every quarter. So just set that money aside because it's not yours. You never need to touch it. It just comes in and goes out. It's going to feel basically pointless, but you have to be VAT registered if you're earning more than £80,000 per year. So minus the VAT of the £10,000, 25% of that is going to be corporation tax. So for every £10,000 that comes in, £2,500 of that has to be paid out as corporation tax. This though is tax on profits. So if you purchase any computer equipment, say a new laptop, any office supplies, any travel expenses, all of these reduce your profit margin, so you only end up paying corporation tax on the profits. So make sure that you're offsetting proper business costs effectively, and that way you can get your corporation tax bill down a little bit. It's also not quite 25%. The corporation tax rates in the UK are 25% for profits above £250,000 and 19% for profits below £50,000. You're probably going to be sitting somewhere between these two numbers, and in those cases, companies with profits between £50,000 and £250,000 will pay tax at the main rate, reduced by a marginal relief. This provides a gradual increase in the effective corporation tax rate. This means that if you're sitting somewhere between those numbers, your corporation tax bill is probably going to sit somewhere like 21-22%. So let's assume that there were no business expenses. So of that £10,000, 2,500 went straight to corporation tax. After that point, there's no large amounts of tax to pay as a business. The next thing is how you can actually pay yourself. So you've got your company, your limited company, which is a legal entity, and then you've got yourself. You are going to be the sole employee of the company, and you need to pay yourself a salary. That money that you pay yourself as a salary and also in dividends is money that's yours and you can spend freely on your mortgage or rent, anything. There's different tax bands, so there's different ways to pay yourself to make sure that you're more tax efficient. Typically, every single month, you're going to get a tax-free allowance of £1,047 that you can pay yourself as a salary. And then there's also different dividend thresholds as well. So the basic rate is 8.75% between 12,571 and 50,270. And if you go above this number, so 50,271, your dividend tax is going to go up to 33.75%. This means if you want to be as efficient as possible, don't pay yourself a dividend any higher than the 8.75% threshold. This would mean that every month, to be the most tax efficient as possible, you pay yourself a salary of £1,047, a dividend of £3,058, give or take. It has to be also based on your company profits. Don't just pay yourself a fixed dividend every month. Of that £358, 8.75% is going to be taxed. It's going to work out to about £260. Due to something called payment on account, HMRC in the first year of operating as a company is going to ask for your tax for next year as well. And that can be quite a considerable increase than just the £260. So to make sure you're covered and make sure absolutely nothing is missed and you're not hit with a tax bill that you can't afford at the end of the year, I would recommend that you offset about £500 to £600 per month. Just put that into a tax pot, so at the end of the year you can just use that to pay your tax bill, and then anything that's left over you can just put back into your main account. This would mean that you've got about £3,605 to live on. If this seems unaffordable for you, then you can of course pay yourself a higher salary and a higher dividend, but you're going to incur more tax by doing that. So of course it completely depends on your expenses, where you live, how expensive your rent or mortgage is, but just know that if you want to pay less tax and operate more sustainably, then these are the kind of numbers that you probably want to stick to. I've worked with contractors before that will literally get their day rate, let's say it's £500 per day, and they will take literally everything out of the company beyond the VAT and corporation tax that they needed to pay. And this puts them at high risk, because if you lose that contract for whatever reason, say the market turns or we're hit with a pandemic, then you cannot continue to afford to pay yourself or afford your lifestyle month to month. To be as sustainable as possible, you should be leaving quite a large chunk in the business account. So if you lose a contract, you can continue to pay yourself the same salary and the same dividend every single month, regardless of if there's money going into the company every single month. But just don't be silly about the whole thing. Just pay yourself a reasonable amount that is sustainable long term. Remember that contracts are not permanent full-time jobs. They can just be dropped with typically 2 weeks notice, and then you need to go and find a new contract. This has only actually happened to me once, and it was during the COVID pandemic. I was working for a train company, and of course no one was booking trains during COVID, and the first people to go were all of the contractors. And then finding a contract during COVID was quite difficult. I think it took about 2 months of interviewing before I finally got one. But in that time, I could just continue to pay myself the exact same salary and dividend. So there was no stress from a money perspective because I'd actually saved up like 2 years worth of income in the limited company. So no issue for me at all. Now, as I said, I know this stuff looks complicated. There's VAT, corporation tax, self-assessment to think about. But once you've actually got it all operating and you're doing it automatically using software like Free Agent, for example, then most of it feels completely automated. The accountant will just let you know how much tax that you need to pay at all of the different times. So just leave that up to them. So at the end of the month, you just go through and do all your bookkeeping, make sure it's always up to date. The accountant will double check it over, and as long as everything matches, no issue at all. So finally, let's talk about day rates, what you can expect as a senior software engineer contractor. I'm not really going to go into the day rates of mid and junior contracts because I have seen those. In fact, like I think they're about, you're talking 250, 300 pounds a day. I don't think that's high enough to warrant leaving full-time employment. And also full-time employment is better, in my opinion, for learning the trade of being a software engineer. As a contractor, you're typically expected to already know how to do everything. There's no educational benefit, there's no growth benefit. You're just there to come in, do a job, get it finished, and then leave and move on to the next company. Typically, the day rates you'll see are around 400 to 600 pounds per day. There are some anomalies. I've seen some contracts go up to £1,000 a day, but typically when you look, that is the range that you're going to see. Now, just a note from me on some experience that I've got from being a contractor for a long time. If you want to stay in this market long term, then you need to start building a bit of a network. And when I say network, I don't mean like you need to know 50 people. I just mean 4, 5 people in the industry, in management, that you can stay in touch with so you can be at the front of their mind every time they need a new contractor. Getting the first contract is going to be the hardest one because you don't know anyone in the industry. You probably have to go through a recruiter. But once you've proven yourself to that recruiter that you can interview well and you're representing them well, then they're more likely to want to work with you more in the future. So make sure you've got some recruiters on your books that are working with you and trust you. And then when you actually start a contract, you're going to meet a lot of other contractors. When those contractors leave and go to different companies, or when management leave and go to different companies, they're going to want to hire more contractors. So if you're in touch with those people, they're going to reach out to you and say, hey, I've got this contract available, would you like it? And then a lot of the time you can actually get contracts without even interviewing at all. The last contract that I got was through a previous manager at a different company. And then he just messaged me saying, do you want the contract? I said yes. And then in 2 weeks I started, no interview, because if I ended up being shit, which you knew I wasn't, then they could just fire me the next day. Not an issue at all. So you're kind of an expendable resource to companies. The one thing that we also haven't mentioned is something called IR35. Now, typically when you see contracts, you're going to see the term inside IR35 or outside IR35. You want contracts that are outside in almost all cases. Inside means that you cannot operate through a limited company and you have to take that day rate as a salary and pay the full tax on it as you would as a PAYE earner. But you also don't get a pension, you don't get holiday, you don't get sick pay. So all of the benefits of PAYE are gone. So you're taking on all of the risk and you get none of the benefits. It's just not worth it. The reason the government introduced this was because there was a lot of people that they deemed as something called disguised employees, which were people operating as contractors, taking the higher day rates, but were actually just doing business as usual stuff. So they might have been managing people, managing the operations of the company, and this is typically a no-no if you're a contractor. You should be going in to work on a specific project, get that project over the line, and then leave and then go to a different company. That means that the contract you sign needs to be watertight from that regard. Make sure that they specifically say you're not doing any business as usual stuff. You're not doing any kind of management. You're just working on a particular project. Make sure that project is well defined and outlined with deadlines in the contract. And that will be much more watertight, because if you do get investigated and they deem that you're actually inside IR35, so you're a disguised employee, then they can backdate the difference in tax for 6 years, I think it is. So just don't take the piss with it. Make sure you're signing watertight contracts. But hopefully that covers absolutely everything. As I say, if you do have any questions, just let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to answer anything. And if you do want to follow me weekly, I've left a newsletter link down in the description. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.